prison for the rest of your life. That means you'll die there.
Watch a bloodthirsty criminal try to tackle a judge. A man collapsed in tears after being freed.
Not guilty of...
A dangerous criminal threatened the victim's family in the eye.
This is the worst case I have ever seen.
And a judge being dragged away from the court. Here are some of the most insane reactions to hearing sentences and other unbelievable moments
Ever, Jeffrey! Jeffrey! I hate you!
that happened in court.
Smile, laugh, and shake your head like this was no big deal.
Ronnie ONeal.
I am not sorry.
I hope this despicable man suffers every minute of his life. Ronnie ONeal was convicted for gunning down his own family, leaving behind just his son, who miraculously survived. When Ronnie was brought to the court, this horrible man refused to show any regret. Even the presiding judge was horrified and claimed this.
This is the worst case I have ever seen as far as the facts go. When the person from fire department, when he testified, and when he said that he retrieved the body of Ronnie ONeal, it took every ounce I had not to start sobbing too.
Sadly, Ronnie remained remorseless as he heard his charges. He gulped for a fraction of a second before going back to his emotionless self. This was after Ronnie had pleaded his own case, representing himself as his lawyer. Eventually, Ronnie was found guilty of all charges and sentenced. The judge claimed Ronnie could have made a good lawyer, had he taken the right path. Sadly, Ronnie only cared for himself, as he smiled in response. Jaleel Hoskins. Jaleel Hoskins was facing the jury because he had brutally deprived his girlfriend, Latrice Mays, of life. Throughout the trial, Hoskins displayed different expressions, including crying when he took the stand, and claiming he only acted in a rage because he was afraid Mays would report him to the police for a separate incident. But the jury and court refused to sympathize with him and handed him a hefty sentence of 50 to 100 years for the first charge, and an additional 10 to 12 years for tampering with evidence. And here is Hoskins' reaction. Even if Hoskins wasn't given a tough sentence, acting like this surely sealed the deal, because his menacing actions proved he wasn't ever innocent. Let's hope prison teaches him a lesson every day. Joseph Ziegler. Joseph Ziegler, indicted for a homicide case that happened in 1990, but had been running cold until he was caught. Ziegler remained aggressive throughout the court proceedings, with the judge warning him numerous times. The court had charged him because his DNA was found at the scene. Despite this proof, Ziegler maintained he was being treated unfairly.
I had nothing to do with this. I maintain my innocence.
That statement is one Cheryl Cohen cares to disagree with.
I was 95%. He took the stand. Is it, the expression, you just put your nail in your coffin? He just put 12 in his.
But all sympathies left the court when the judge sentenced him to execution. And his response? He elbowed his own attorney. Luckily, his lawyer was able to fend off the ambush and even give Ziegler a little something to remember. As for Ziegler, his constant misdemeanor and never-ending disrespect for the court did little to help him against his sentencing. Jeremy Christian. Jeremy Christian has a couple of crimes under his belt, but he's most known for the Portland train attack in 2017. Christian was leering insults, racist and anti-Muslim remarks at two teenagers aboard the Portland train. When fellow passersby confronted him, Christian pulled out a knife, taking the lives of two people and severely injuring another. Christian was taken in by the police and given multiple life sentences. At this point, Christian began arguing with the judge, sneering at her and shouting derogatory remarks. He was swiftly shackled back up and taken away by the bailiffs. Well, at least he's in jail. Anthony Kirkland. When you take not one, but multiple lives, it's clear you don't deserve any consolation. Kirkland was responsible for brutally denying 5 victims of living their lives. He wasn't caught until almost a year after his last victim was discovered. Kirkland immediately entered a guilty plea, and the sentencing from there on was understandably swift. The court sentenced Kirkland to be executed, and he reacted by fainting.
Mr. Kirkland, you are charged with attempted rape with specifications, aggravated murder with specifications, aggravated robbery with specifications, aggravated murder.
Everybody stay seated, please.
He can faint as much as he wants in jail, where he's been locked up since the sentencing. TJ Lane.
You don't know kind. You're evil.
We've seen some disrespectful reactions, but this villainous criminal's actions are easily the worst. TJ Lane opened fire in Chardon High School, injuring a total of 6 people, 3 of whom ended up passing away. As if the incident wasn't horrible enough, TJ Lane displayed such bad behavior throughout court, it can easily be said he isn't human. Not only did TJ Lane smile throughout the court case, haunting the families of victims, he even wore this shirt in an attempt to rile up the victims. Sadly, his disgusting actions didn't end there. After hearing the victim impact statement, Lane gestured provocatively and made extremely disgusting derogatory statements. Lane was subsequently sentenced to 3 life sentences without parole. Well deserved. Shondell Jackson. Shondell Jackson took the life of a young man during an attempted mugging. A few weeks later, Jackson was in the court, hearing out his charges. Even before the sentence, Jackson was seen leering at the victim's family behind, as if taunting them. The judge noticed his disrespectful and disgusting antics, and quickly sentenced him to life. This is when Jackson looked behind him, with eyes seething with hatred.
For extended supervision. I know that is something that is reserved for the most serious of cases, and I believe that this case rises to that level.
And quickly hopped off, trying to tackle the victim's family. Almost instantly, a corrections officer tackled Jackson, but it took several more and a hefty dose of pepper spray to take Jackson down. Esteban Carpio. Sometimes it's not the criminal that has a crazy outburst, but their family. Esteban Carpio was under investigation for a separate incident when he tackled the detective, grabbed his gun, shot the detective, and jumped down from the building. The detective passed away quickly after. Carpio was immediately apprehended, a little injured but safe. His family maintained he was mentally ill, and his actions proved so, but the court didn't think so. Carpio was brought to court wearing a Hannibal Lecter-esque mask, which the court claimed was to prevent him from biting officers. But his family claimed it was because he'd been bruised by detectives and was being punished unjustly. Here's their full reaction.
I'm not guilty! I'm not guilty, Stephen!
It's gross police brutality. He was mentally ill, and he needed help, and we couldn't get it. We tried and tried.
Daniel Villegas.
The accused are present in the courtroom. It's the verdict.
We've seen many cases where the accused reacted hysterically, even though they were guilty. But sometimes, justice isn't served correctly, and many suffer for the crimes of others. Daniel Villegas was beside himself, as he awaits verdict for the 3rd time, after being in prison for a crime he claimed he didn't commit when he was 16, without any sort of evidence. Sadly, it took more than 20 years until Villegas could plead his case. Villegas, who was 41 at the time of the final retrial, maintained his innocence throughout the 23 years. And here he is, reacting to being finally exonerated and proven innocent.
The state of Texas versus Daniel Villegas. Verdict form B. We, the jury, find the defendant Daniel Villegas not guilty of...
Although he's free now, he can never get back those years. Penelope Soto. Penelope Soto was in custody for possessing and misusing Xanax without prescription. She acted disorderly throughout her first interaction with the presiding judge. The interaction went viral. In the beginning, Soto acted irresponsibly, messing with her hair and smiling. Luckily, the judge was patient and humored her even though she kept being disrespectful, until she flipped him off.
What is your standard bond?
It should be...
Ain't gonna be no PTS.
Okay, 5,000 on count one, and then the rest should be ROR.
Bye-bye.
Adios.
Come back, ma'am. Come back.
But unlike most defendants, Soto did change. Soto underwent a court-mandated program and sincerely apologized to the judge.
Yes, I understand completely, and I apologize.
Claiming she was still under the influence during the proceedings. Her charges were dropped, and she set out on the right path. Before we move any further, like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell icon so you can keep watching our amazing content. Amber Heard. We all know the very public trial between Amber Heard, the American actress, and Johnny Depp. After Depp filed the defamation suit, a lot of commotion and pandemonium followed. But after several weeks, Amber was found guilty. Here she is, reacting to the jury's verdict.
Following the decision, Amber shares this statement: "The disappointment I feel today is beyond words. I'm heartbroken that the mountain of evidence still was not enough to stand up to the disproportionate power, influence, and sway of my ex-husband."
Amber refused to look up, keeping a somber expression on her face. She kept the grave expression through the entirety of her verdict, which awarded Depp $15 million. Her team even questioned the jury's verdict, leading to reconfirmation.
All right, I do find that the jury's verdict is unanimous. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes your service in this case. I want to thank you again for your dedication and your hard work during this trial, and I know I speak for everybody here. So I'm going to have you go back to the jury deliberation room for one more time, and then we'll release you from there, okay? All right, thank you.
She then walked out of the court, seemingly unfazed and ignoring the spectators. Johnny Depp.
Time, okay? All right. Court is adjourned. Thank you.
All right.
Although Amber quickly left the courtroom, we see the reaction on the other side. Here, Depp's team reacts with all smiles as the judge dismisses them. The team embraces each other, clearly happy at the outcome. And although Depp wasn't available in the courtroom, his reaction at hearing the verdict is drastically different from the defendant. Here he is, getting out of his car, heading toward a concert in the UK. He even heads to a pub later on, swarmed by a crowd of fans who shout out their love and support.
Jodi, we love Johnny, I love you, bro. I love you, bro. I love you, bro. I love you.
Clearly, the emotions on the other side of the court are drastically different. Diana Lovejoy. Diana Lovejoy conspired with her lover, McDavid, and hired a hitman to get rid of her ex-husband, Greg Mulvihill. Luckily for Greg, the plan didn't work, as he was barely injured and survived. But the deed was done, and Lovejoy was quickly apprehended by police, and later faced a judge after McDavid revealed the plan. During the course of the trial, Lovejoy denied her involvement and claimed she was being framed. But the incriminating evidence against her was too much, and she was sentenced to 26 years, and even ordered to pay $500,000 to Greg. Greg was given sole custody of their son, since it's obvious Lovejoy wouldn't be available. And here is how she reacts.
Murder.
Hang on. All right, we're going to need to take a break. You're done. And you could have...
Despicable. Donta Wright.
That's how, that's how he handles everything. As a child, if he was in trouble,
he'll just look at you and smile.
He's gonna smile at you.
Knowing he's in trouble, but still.
This is Antoinette Carter, defending her son's repulsive reaction to hearing his sentencing in court. Her son, Donta Wright, was being sentenced for taking the life of a young student after robbing him. But throughout the court proceedings, the then 17-year-old Wright remained remorseless and even taunted the victim's family.
I no longer get to see the smile of my son when he walked to the door and brings me a Frosty from Wendy's at the end of his shift. This year was supposed to be a year of celebration, of senior pictures with prom and graduation and parties.
Watch him rub his hands and appear in a content mood while the victim impact statement was being read. And he takes it up a notch by smiling during this.
I sincerely hope that whatever it was you wanted so badly that you felt the need to murder my son was worth the next at least 52 years of your continued existence.
He showed a similar response when he was sentenced to a minimum of 25 to 52 years in prison. Even Satan wouldn't do something like this. Bryce Rhodes. Bryce Rhodes was accused of a triple homicide and swiftly taken to the court where he was to hear his sentence. Unfortunately, some people remain cruel even when they're apprehended for their actions, and Rhodes didn't take a second to show his face to the jury.
I would suggest you do what helps you, not what hurts you.
Okay, that's what I want to do. Let's get that understood.
When confronted with the crimes and looking at multiple life sentences, this awful criminal taunted the victim's family by continuously smiling at them. If that wasn't horrible enough, he then began making disturbing hand gestures to a member of the victim's family in hopes of riling her up.
Ma'am, look at me, ma'am. Mr. Rhodes, you're smiling. I don't know why you're smiling.
Because I can. It's not a crime to smile.
And when he was handed his hefty sentence, he accused the judge of being involved with the victim's lawyer.
I don't know if y'all got some type of sexual relationship going on. Are you some type of racist? Which one is it?
Or are you just wrong? Everything that you've made a motion for.
Are you a secret Ku Klux Klan member?
What a deplorable man. Erica Mae Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham. Erica Mae Butts and Shanita Latrice Cunningham were facing the judge after committing a crime too horrendous to describe. While they'd savagely taken another life, the couple was under the impression that they had done nothing wrong. Then followed a speedy trial, and each of the criminals was slapped with a life sentence. The two began wailing and screaming. And one of them quickly collapsed to the floor, where she began to throw a tantrum. The other had to be dragged out of the court, hiccuping and screaming as if this was an unfair sentence. How they reacted is unique, but shows people really don't think actions can have consequences. Tracy Hunter. Some people love to misuse their power, but when former Judge Tracy Hunter's misuse of position became public, it was clear she hadn't expected to be caught. The former Hamilton County judge was on trial because she'd used her position to extract confidential information about a criminal case involving her brother. But it seems she wasn't willing to admit how erroneous her actions were, as she was seen laughing in court.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And if I could just say more, I'd like to. First of all, she has been very helpful to us as we have litigated her case up to the Ohio Supreme Court and in federal habeas. So that's number one.
But this soon changes when she hears the verdict. Guilty and 6 months in jail. This is what happens when you commit actions without considering the consequences. Guess she'll be dragged to jail. Shayna Huber. In 2012, Ryan Poston, the then boyfriend of Shayna Huber, met a tragic end as Huber fired at him 6 times. 3 years later, Huber stood at trial. Throughout the trial, Hubers had maintained her actions were out of self-defense, and she only retaliated to save her life. But the jury didn't believe her, mostly because while in custody, she danced and sang, and confessed happily.
I did it. Yeah, I did it.
She was desperate to tell her story, to have people hear her side. She wanted to get that all out there, and I really think in her mind, Shayna thought that everybody would just buy it.
And even laughed in court. Clearly, Huber's actions didn't sit well with the court, which ruled against her and sentenced her to 40 years in prison, with eligibility of parole after 34 years of imprisonment.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder.
Guilty! The woman who shot her boyfriend because he was about to ditch her for a Miss USA contestant sobs as she is convicted of murder.
No use crying now. Eric Kelly. And here we see a rather unusual reaction. A convict smiling after the judge hands him the verdict. This is Eric Kelly, a man who spent 22 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. It all began when back in 1993, a video store worker lost his life after a robbery. Investigations weren't going as smoothly as detectives hoped, until they met Kelly. Kelly was quickly taken in for questioning, when a confession was forced out of him, without the interaction being recorded or witnessed. A life sentence was slapped on his wrist, and Kelly spent 2 decades pleading his innocence from behind bars. In 2017, DNA reports proved Kelly wasn't responsible, and in 2018, a court ruled in his favor. His reaction says it all.
A new trial was granted, and Kelly is now outside of prison for the first time in almost a quarter century, still with the fear he might go back.
Lamar Johnson. There are many cases where justice was served, but sadly, the judicial system isn't always right. In 1995, Lamar Johnson was convicted of taking down a man with firearms, despite Johnson being away from the crime scene. He was sentenced to life without parole. Johnson tried multiple times to plead his case, but the justice system turned him away. Just as he lost all hope, in 2019, his case was reopened and filed for a new trial. After an intense court proceedings and an even excruciating 27 years, Lamar Johnson was declared innocent and a free man.
2941-37068 is hereby set aside and held for naught. Bailiff?
Yes, sir.
This hearing is adjourned.
All right. The business
Johnson could barely hold his tears and hugged his attorneys before embracing his family. Trey Alexander Relford. In one of the rarest court moments ever, we see a man hug the very person who took his son's life. Trey Alexander Relford attacked a Pizza Hut delivery driver, leaving him to succumb to his injuries. The police quickly caught Relford, who was brought in front of a jury and the victim's heartbroken father. After Relford pleaded guilty, the court was leaning towards sentencing him to life, when something unexpected happened, and he was sentenced to just 31 years. During the victim impact statement, Abdul Munim Sombat Chitmund, the father of the victim, claimed he didn't blame Relford and openly forgave him.
I forgive you on behalf of Salahuddin and his mother.
Citing the convict was a victim of failed society and needed help. In an emotional moment, the two embraced, with Relford bawling his eyes out. Cody L. Howard and Tanner D. Jacobson. What you're about to see is probably one of the most amusing reactions. Cody L. Howard and Tanner D. Jacobson had just been sentenced for their respective crimes, Howard for burglary and Jacobson for reckless driving. And then the two did something spectacular. In an instant, the two ran away, with the agile judge in pursuit. Then followed an exciting chase around the courtroom and corrections facility. with Jacobson finally being caught. Although Howard managed to run away, he stopped on his own accord after the adrenaline finally wore off. Spencer Boston. Imagine being apprehended for a crime and committing that very crime in front of the judge's eyes. Spencer Boston, a resident of Lebanon, Tennessee, was brought to court for handling and possessing marijuana. Although Boston's crime didn't have that hefty of a sentence, it was serious, since the plant was illegal in the state at the time. The judge tried explaining this to him, but it didn't seem he wasn't willing to listen.
What was it you said to the crowd?
I said, we the people deserve better, because it's ridiculous.
You pulled that joint out. Was there actually marijuana in it?
Yes, sir. There was.
Then, Boston did something you only see in movies. He pulled out a cigarette, obviously laced with the same stuff, and smoked it in front of the judge. He then spent 10 days in jail for contempt of court. But I bet the memory stayed with him forever. Alan McCarty. McCarty was already under investigation for another case, but he made headlines when he threatened the presiding judge. Fast forward a couple of weeks, and McCarty was in court again, but this time for cursing and threatening the judge. Naturally, the offense was too great, and McCarty was facing a minimum of 20 years in prison. Anyone in McCarty's position would have apologized, but what he did was quite the opposite.
You stupid piece of then also. You threatened my life, you in the you
Yup, threaten the judge again. That's gonna work. McCarty's now in prison, facing up to 40 years. Jeffrey Dahmer. We've seen even the most ruthless criminals break down in front of the victims' families. But Jeffrey Dahmer, the notorious manslayer, didn't even look up once during the victim impact statement. One of his victim's sisters, Rita Isabel, confronted Jeffrey, claiming no mother should ever go through the pain of losing their loved one.
I don't want to ever see my mother have to go through this again. Never, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I hate you, mother. I hate you.
And then went on to directly inflict insults to Jeffrey, who remained calm and composed. This angered Isabel even more, and rightly so. She even questioned him about his apathetic attitude. And when even that didn't get any response, she tackled him before being restrained by the court officers.
You don't have to
Take it easy, it's right.
Jodi Arias. Jodi Arias is one of the worst criminals in the US, and not only because of what she did. Arrested for ending her boyfriend's life, Arias first went viral when her confession tape was made public, from which it doesn't look like she's in interrogation. When left alone, Arias did a headstand. And even sang.
The stars are brightly shining. This is the day of our dear Savior's birth.
Naturally, her actions would be held accountable in court. Her narcissistic actions even made it on TV, after she was seen smiling and laughing on camera. And here she is, showing remorse, only after being charged guilty.
We find the defendant as to count 1, first-degree murder, guilty.
Please stand for the jury.
She refused comments and walked out after being sentenced to life. Taylor Schabusiness. Taylor Schabusiness was in court for brutally taking her ex-boyfriend's life. The crime wasn't discovered until February 2022, and Taylor has since spent her days in prison. During court proceedings, Taylor responded weirdly, almost as if trying to convince the court that she was mentally ill and wouldn't hold up in court. Even her defense attorney was pushing the claim. But when Taylor realized she was being charged guilty, she chose to react rather vehemently and tackled her own lawyer.
Stop it.
She was restrained and taken out of the court, and the rest of her sentence was carried out. Life sentence without parole. Eileen Warnus. Eileen Warnus was convicted for taking the lives of 7 men, all of whom she claimed took advantage of her. The court initially sentenced Eileen to life, but this was a while after she had repeatedly confessed, without showing any remorse. She even acknowledged she probably wouldn't live long and would welcome even extreme punishments. Well, the court listened to her and sentenced her to execution. And this was Eileen's reaction.
Thank you. And probably see, I'll be up in heaven while y'all are rotting in hell.
She then went on to threaten the victim's family, and then even threatened the judge, before finally being taken out of the court. Thank you very much for watching the video. Do like and share it with your friends. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to not miss any of the upcoming amazing videos. Thank you once again.